What's going on, everyone? My name is Jason Latayad with Point B Studios, and in this video I'm going to show you the 7 must-know panels you need to know to be effective in After Effects. What's going on, everyone? Thank you for joining me in this tutorial. I think this is going to be a useful lesson in understanding the basics of After Effects, and we're talking about panels. So let's get right into it. The first panel I'm going to go over with you is the project panel. The project panel, in my opinion, is the most important panel because it shows you where all your files are. It allows you to organize your files, your assets, everything you're going to be using inside of After Effects. And by keeping yourself organized, you are well on your way to being very efficient inside of After Effects. So if you're wanting to bring in assets into your project, there's a couple ways that you can go about it. First thing you can do is you can go up to File right here, go down to Import, and you can select either file or multiple files. You can select from libraries, other Premiere Pro projects, things of that nature. You have a lot of leeway in what you can import. Another way that you can do it is you can double click inside of the project panel and you will get a window that pops up, and you can choose whatever assets you want to bring in. If there are files in your project panel or in your project that you don't want anymore, you can actually go down and drag it into this little trash can button right here. If you highlight it over as well, it'll tell you that you can delete it. If you want to make a folder and organize your projects or your assets or any other things you're using inside your project, so you have a list of things going on in here and you want to keep them organized, you can select whatever you want to group together and you can drag them into this folder like so, and you can create another folder. So that's a really good way of keeping things organized, knowing where everything is. Use folders. Create folders when it makes sense so you're not over cluttering your project panel. The project panel is also used for creating a new composition. After Effects works in composition, kind of like the sequences inside of Premiere Pro. So go to Composition, New Composition, and this is where you will create your composition. If you're creating a 1080p timeline, something like this preset will work just fine. Adjust your frame rate. If you're wanting something more cinematic, then you'll want 23.976 or 24, and then you can choose the duration of your composition and then go from there. The other thing you can do is you can actually come down into the project panel and you can click this button right here, create a new composition. Same window will appear and you can set your parameters as well. Another way to bring up a new composition is also by selecting Command or Control N. That will also bring up your composition. The next panel I'm going to go over with you is the Libraries panel. Now the Libraries panel is, in my opinion, pretty important, not just for understanding color themes and using it for assets and things of that nature, but I use it as a form of inspiration as well, getting ideas for a design that I might be working on. So, if I'm thinking of maybe something architectural or something, I might go into the search bar here, type in buildings, we'll see what pops up here, and I get a list of images that I can use to sift through to get some inspiration. We'll type in skies or clouds even. Maybe I want to design some clouds. If I want to enlarge the size of these here, I can actually, while I'm in the Libraries panel, I can hit the tilde button and I can enlarge the size of the panel so I can see everything in full view. And I can just, within After Effects, look at some inspirational assets that I can use to incorporate in a new design. And I think that's really awesome. I know you can go to Google, go to a search engine and find stuff, but it's pretty cool to have this feature embedded inside of After Effects for you to search for ways to be creative. The next panel we're going to go over is the timeline. After Effects is a layer-based compositor, and so you use a layer-based system in order to create your work. So as you can see, I have an image in here, and you can manipulate what you want to do with that layer inside of the timeline. As you can see, this is being represented visually inside the composition panel, which is another important panel. The composition panel is essential for visually seeing the work you're doing while you're working. And I'll cover that here in just a second. But back over to the timeline panel, there's a lot of things that you can manipulate. Timeline panel allows you to control your blending modes when you have more than one layer on top of one another. You can also use it for track matting and masking. You can also use it for adding effects to it. You can make 3D layers. A lot of things you can do inside of the timeline panel, and I'm just covering the basics. And as I was saying before, the composition is the visual representation of the work you're doing inside of the timeline panel. So the kinds of things you can do inside of the composition panel, you can zoom your work in and out to get more precision. You can bring up this little button right here to bring up your title action safe. This way you can get things accurate in your space, making sure that you're not creating graphics that are going to get cut off frame. You can also use a proportional grid. You can even add a ruler option to this as well. If you're working with some very high-end footage, maybe 4K or 5K or something, a lot of times you can adjust the quality of the footage so you can make your workflow a little bit faster. So by going to this area right here, you can downsample your resolution while you're working. It doesn't downsample in the final version, but while you're working, you can downsample it by clicking this menu. At full, it'll show the resolution as it is initially. You can reduce it down by half, a third, or a quarter to reduce it to a resolution that won't tax your computer while you're working. You will see a downgrade in visual quality by making that decision, but your workflow will be a lot faster. You can also take snapshots of your work, but there are a lot of different options that you can adjust inside of the composition panel. The next thing I'm going to go over is the effects control panel. The effects control panel is where all of your effects lay inside of a given layer. So if I were to add effects to this logo right here, all of them will appear inside of this effect controls panel. So if I were to go into my effect, for example, click here, I'll click in curves for instance. It'll show up here, and I can make adjustments. Brighter, darker, adjust my curves. And as you can see, I'm affecting the layer in the timeline panel. You can see it being affected inside the composition panel, and you're getting a real-time adjustment as you're making changes. You can also see your effects inside of the layer itself. So if you go over to this caret drop down and go to effects, you can see the curve in here. The next panel I'm going to go over with you is the character panel. The character panel allows you to manipulate text that you create inside of the composition. But in order to manipulate the text, you have to create it first. So we're going to go over to the type tool, and we're going to create some text. You can click anywhere in your composition window here, and a layer will be created in the timeline panel, and you can type in whatever you want to type. In this case, we'll just say panels. Once we've created our text, I'm going to double click on the layer inside of the timeline, and now you can actually make adjustments inside of the character panel. And you can adjust your font. You can adjust the font weight, and you can even adjust the font size. You can also mess with tracking if you want to give yourself more space between letters, kind of like this. If you have your cursor selected in between two letters, your kerning tool will space out accordingly that way, and you can even change the color of the text. If you don't like white, you can select something like maybe blue. You can even take your eyedropper tool here and you can pick a color, maybe something like that. And then maybe I want to move this. So make sure you have your selection tool selected, grab your text, and maybe place it somewhere right here. Maybe something like that. The last panel I'm going to go over with you is the render queue. Render queue is where you're going to render out your work. So when you get done designing something, and you're ready to render it out into an image or a video file, you will want to make sure that you're in the timeline and you have the comp that you want to render. Then you go to composition, go to add to render queue, and it will pop up for you to render. And you can go to clicking your render settings. So in this case, we'll say I want to just make a PNG out of this. So we'll leave this at best settings. I'm not gonna mess with that. And I'll go into output mode and I'll click PNG and I'll get a list of settings. You can choose from anything in here. In this case, I'm gonna choose a PNG sequence. If you go to video output, I'm gonna make sure that channels are RGB plus alpha, and then you can go to format options, but in this case, I don't want any compression, so I'm gonna leave this alone. We're not resizing, we're not cropping. There's no audio in this file, so the audio is not gonna come up for that. So in this case, we'll just say okay. And then you go to your output, and you can click on this and choose where you want to save it. In this case, we're gonna go to the desktop, and I will name this panels, and I will hit render. Alright everyone, I hope you got some value out of this video. I think understanding your panels is going to go a long way helping you to understand how After Effects works. So hit that like button if you liked it, share it with someone you think is going to get some value out of it, and also hit that subscribe button. I'm going to have more content coming out on a regular basis, so in the meantime, stay motivated, and I'll see you in the next video.